My father was a lumberjack. He was shot and killed by a noblewoman named Emily while he was collecting firewood in the forest. Emily, filled with anger, rode her horse and whipped my father's corpse with a riding crop. Peasant, it's all your fault for blocking my view. Otherwise my arrow would have hit the deer in front. 7 years later, Emily was bitten on the face by a venomous insect, leaving her disfigured and unable to face anyone. I stepped forward and said, "Miss, I am willing to use my brush to restore your former beauty." Emily glanced at me indifferently. "If you can't, I'll peel off your skin and drain your blood." Later, I really did restore Emily's appearance, and she became extremely dependent on me. But she didn't know that my brush was made of zombie bones. Zombie bones are extremely poisonous. Painting one's face with it will kill them within 7 days. Another person died in Emily's mansion. Ever since Emily was bitten by a venomous insect and became disfigured, her temper had worsened. This time, it was the maid who combed and styled her hair. Just because she accidentally dropped one of Emily's ink-black long hairs, Emily became furious. Someone used the comb to comb off her hair until she dies. Maid screamed incessantly as she died. Her scalp was scraped again and again by the wooden comb, carrying through her scalp, scraping her skull, and she bled to death. At this time, Emily was sitting in front of the bronze mirror, covering the large bruised black spots on her face with her hand, and said, "Jenny, come and do my makeup." The maids present all knelt down, trembling, but none of them dared to move. "Where's Jenny?" Emily turned her head and glanced fiercely at the maids kneeling in the room. "What, you did not obey my orders?" An older maid replied tremblingly, "Miss Jenny, her eyes are blind now." After Emily was disfigured, the first thing she did was to have all the maids in the mansion have their faces crawled on by venomous insects. She had ruined her face, so she wanted all the maids in the mansion to be like her disfigured. Jenny was a maid who had been with Emily for many years. Only she was unlucky. The venomous insects fluid flowed into her eyes, and she became blind. Since Jenny is blind and useless, throw her into the well and drown her. A smile slowly appeared on the corner of Emily's mouth. "Now, who will do my makeup?" The maids present were trembling like chaff, but none of them dared to answer. This was the 3rd day since Emily was disfigured. In the past few days, the maids who served Emily, whether they painted her eyebrows too lightly or put on too much blush, were all put to death by Emily. "Oh, could it be that you are all the hands of 1,000 gold disdaining to do my makeup?" Emily flung her skirt and said angrily, "Drag them all down and stab their faces to death." "Yes?" The guards with knives immediately rushed in and drove the maids away. At this critical moment, I took a deep breath, stood up, and saluted Emily. "Miss, I am willing to paint your face and restore your former beauty." Emily laughed. "Slaves are so lowly. In order to survive for a while, they dare to boast." Suddenly, she sat back on the dressing stool, again her eyes fixed on me with extreme sharpness. "If you can't restore my face, I'll peel off your skin and drain your blood." I took out a paintbrush from my arms and walked towards Emily, with neither humility nor arrogance. The brush had 2 ends. The front tip was black and the back tip was white. I held the white brush and placed it on the bruised and black part of Emily's face that had been bitten by the venomous insect, gently outlining it step by step. As I painted the bruise, under Emily's left eyelid gradually disappeared. Her beautiful face also gradually revealed itself. I'm so beautiful again. Emily reached out and stroked her cheek, her face filled with shock and satisfaction. She was almost ecstatic and kept muttering, I have finally regained my former beauty. With such a face, all the men in the world will bow down to me. 3 days ago, Emily shot and killed a wild deer in the woods outside the city. She was bloodthirsty and rode her horse fast, and the guards around her were far away from her. As she concentrated on shooting the deer with her arrow, a pitch black, 10-centimeter long, multi-legged insect happened to fall from the forest. The venomous insect bit Emily as soon as it opened its mouth and sprayed extremely poisonous mucus. Emily screamed in pain and was about to fall off her horse. At that critical moment, Prince Carl from a foreign land rushed over and caught Emily. Emily fell in love with Carl at first sight. Under normal circumstances, Emily would definitely get what she wanted. But Carl was the beloved son of the king of a foreign land, and his status was extraordinary. Therefore, although Emily liked Carl, she did not show any signs of pursuing him due to her damaged appearance. You little maid, do you have some skills? At this time, Emily gently stroked her beautiful face and glanced at me indifferently through the bronze mirror. But I don't seem to have seen you before. I hurriedly knelt down and said in fear and trepidation, I just came to your mansion recently. I am a maid from the outer house. I only got into your inner chamber today to bring you water to wash your face. Emily nodded. From now on, you'll be in charge of my makeup. She was obviously very happy and ordered someone to change her clothes. She was wearing a light pink panty tassel dress. The skirt was embroidered with high-quality silk on both sides. Every time it moved with the wind, the inside and outside of the skirt shimmered and dazzled the eyes. Emily walked out of the inner chamber refreshed. As soon as she stood outside the door, she saw countless butterflies fluttering towards her from high in the air. Everyone was stunned at the sight. However, I knelt down first and shouted, Miss, after your appearance has recovered, you are like a fairy descending to earth. Even butterflies who love flowers and beauty feel ashamed in front of you. Emily was very proud. That's natural. She took 2 personal maids and went out to find Carl by car. Along the way, butterflies followed her, and the people around them, seeing this, all fell to the ground and shouted, Miss was a beauty blessed by heaven. Carl was naturally attracted by this vision. He went boating with Emily, rode horses to admire the flowers, and drank and played the piano at dusk. When Emily came back, it was already midnight and there was still butterflies dancing with her. That night she fell into a deep sleep with great satisfaction. Early the next morning, the effect of the zombie bone slightly faded. Emily's face faintly showed hideous black and purple poisonous scars. She shouted, Where's the maid from yesterday? Hurry up and do my makeup. I put down what I was doing and ran into the inner chamber. As I outlined with the tip of my brush, Emily's mouth showed a satisfied smile again. She glanced at me, seemingly unintentionally, and asked, How can a rough maid like you do such delicate makeup? She was suspicious of me. I hurriedly knelt down and said, I was originally the daughter of the owner of a rouge shop outside the city. It's just that disaster struck from heaven, and my parents both died. I had no choice but to sell myself to your mansion. Emily was obviously not very interested in the death of my parents. She curled her lips and said, As long as you do my makeup, well, I will reward you handsomely. Soon, a flawless face appeared in the bronze mirror again. Emily caressed her fair and jade-like cheek and admired herself narcissistically. With such a peerless beauty within 3 days, Call will definitely be head over heels for me. I looked down at my toes, my heart filled with evil and hatred. Emily didn't know that the brush I used to cover up the blemishes on her face was made of zombie bones. Zombies are people who die with resentment in their hearts, causing them to die, but not to rot. Their bones contain great poison and resentment. Painting one's face with it is like treating a disease with opium. It treats the symptoms, but not the root cause. On the surface, Emily seemed to be beautiful, but in reality, it only aggravated the decay and rotting of her face. As for the butterflies surrounding Emily, they were not real butterflies either. They were called corpse butterflies. Corpse butterflies lived with corpses and fed on corpses. Usually they lived in the abyss of tombs where the sun never shone. But once they saw the sunlight, they would become extremely large, and their wings would glow with glazed light. At first glance, they were extremely beautiful. But in reality, corpse butterflies were messengers of death. Painting the face with corpse bones, corpse butterflies flying in, Emily would die within 7 days. I hated Emily. I wanted her dead. My parents weren't owners of a roast shop. My father was a lumberjack. He didn't have much ability to earn money, but he was good at chopping firewood. His firewood was stacked evenly, and each piece was the same size and thickness. The firewood was extremely crisp and easy to burn. The wealthy families around all liked to buy my father's firewood. Although my father didn't earn much, it was enough for the life of my mother and me. The neighbors often advised my parents to have another child. If it was a boy, he could inherit my father's skill of stacking firewood well, and then my father would have a son to take care of him in his old age. But my father didn't listen. He loved me deeply. When the girls in the same village were learning to spin and weave, I was sent to school by my father to learn to read and write. The neighbors were puzzled. Girls studying, this was going to be laughed at. But my father was not afraid of being laughed at. I still remember that when the teacher saw that I was a girl, he immediately refused to accept me. He was so angry that his beard curled up. Since ancient times, a woman's virtue is to be without talent. How can I teach a girl? This is outrageous. I was so scared that I cried and said I wouldn't go to school. But my father wouldn't allow it. His tall body at that moment bent over. He took out 2 bundles of firewood that he had already stacked and humbly begged the teacher to accept me. He also repeatedly assured that as long as I went to school, he would take care of all the firewood in the teacher's house in the future. I finally got to go to school. I once asked my father why he insisted on letting me study. I could obviously stay at home and spin and weave to make money like my mother. My father's rough hand would gently stroke my head, and he sighed and said, I don't understand the big duality. I only know that my father was a lumberjack, and I am also a lumberjack. But I don't want my daughter to marry a lumberjack. I studied in school for 2 years, learned to read, and could recite the 4 books and 5 classics backwards and forwards. My father was very happy. That day, he carried 2 loads of neatly stacked firewood down the mountain, excitedly thinking of giving it to the teacher and asking him to teach me well. But he never expected that Emily's cold and sharp arrow would pierce his chest. My father fell to the ground. The stacked firewood was scattered all over the ground. Blood soaked my father's clothes, his eyes wide open, staring straight at the sky. At that moment, my father must have been very sad. He was dead, and his wife and daughter had no one to take care of them. Emily rode a white horse to my father's body, raised her whip, and kept whipping my father, shouting angrily, "Peasant! It's all your fault for blocking my view. Otherwise, my arrow would have hit the deer." She whipped so hard that my father's clothes were torn and blood was dripping. It was getting dark, and my mother saw that my father hadn't returned for a long time, so she went out to look for him. But she happened to see Emily whipping my father. She cried and begged Emily to spare his life. Emily smiled and said, "If you want me to keep this peasant's body intact, you can run as far as you can." My mother obediently did as she was told. When Emily saw that my mother was about to run away, she held her bow and arrow and aimed straight at my mother. Whoosh! She was not good at shooting deer, but she was extremely accurate at shooting people. One arrow pierced my mother's neck. Emily was probably in a good mood. Although she failed to shoot a deer, she shot 2 people in a row. She hummed the tune and rode back to the manor with great pleasure. I lost both my parents. After the death of my parents, my uncle embezzled my family property and sold me to a brothel. One day ago, I was still a student in school. One day later, I was singing and dancing in front of men, being humiliated. Until later, a Mr. Jack, paralyzed in a wheelchair, took a fancy to me, took me as his apprentice, and taught me patience, medicine, food, pharmacology, and piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting. The zombie bone in my hand was given to me by him. He said that zombie bones are poisonous. Painting them on the skin will kill you within 7 days. He also said, "Lucy, I never raise useless people. If you can't kill the enemy with your own hands, then use the zombie bone and paint yourself a beautiful face." Mr. Jack's meaning was obvious. If I couldn't kill Emily, then I would kill myself. At this time, Emily was admiring herself in the bronze mirror. The maid outside the door walked in and she curtsied. "Miss Prince Carl is outside asking to see you." Emily's eyes lit up and a bright smile appeared on her lips. Truly a smile that could captivate a city. She got up and said impatiently, "Hurry up and help me get dressed." "Miss." I lowered my head slightly and said softly, "Have you heard the saying, lure the enemy by retreating?" Emily glanced at me. "What do you mean?" "Huh?" I said word by word. "Prince Carl is asking to see you for the first time, and you readily agreed. Wouldn't this make you seem too proactive? As everyone knows, men never cherish women who are too proactive." Emily was stunned for a moment and then muttered in a low voice, "You're right." The next moment she kicked me hard in the chest. "You lovely maid, why didn't you remind me yesterday when I went to see Carl?" I was kicked to the ground, my chest aching. But I still got up and knelt down. "Miss, you first met Carl in the woods, but at that time your face was slightly damaged, and he only had compassion for you but nothing else. And yesterday you went to see him with your original flawless face. Your beauty is like a fairy descending to earth, which will make him fall in love with you at first sight and never forget you." Emily smudged up coldly. "You mean you want me to avoid him?" "Ah, miss, I have a plan that will not only allow you to meet Carl, but also make him beg and thirst for you." I knelt down and walked forward, slowly telling her the plan. Emily was very happy. She pointed to the brocade box on the dressing table and said, "This is for you. Open it and have a look." I opened the brocade box. Inside was a pitch black, multi-legged animal's insect. "With you, my beauty will last forever. You will be with me for the rest of your life." Emily ordered someone to change her clothes. She raised her head slightly, sarcastic smile on her lips. but the marks on your face from being bitten by venomous insects are too light. I want you to be disfigured so that I can rest assured and keep you by my side. I put the venomous insect on my face without hesitation. The venomous insect was hungry and gnawed at my face frantically. I curled up on the ground in pain. Emily smiled happily. Not bad, you are a smart maid. You will have endless glory and wealth in the future. She changed her clothes, put on a light blue gold embroidered long dress, and went out. Outside Emily's mansion, the housekeeper politely rejected Carl according to my instructions. Your Highness, Miss is not at the mansion. Please come back another day. Carl was dressed in a black satin robe embroidered with light bamboo. His face remained expressionless, and he turned and left. After leaving Emily's mansion, he galloped on his horse in the bustling street. The horse neighed and stepped on a 3-year-old child, overturning the toys sold by the vendors on the roadside. The child could not dodge in time and was trampled by the horse. He vomited blood and died on the spot. The child's mother knelt on the ground and screamed, my child, my child. The place was already in a mess with wailing everywhere. But Carl didn't even look through a bag of gold and silver and ran even faster on his horse. I stood in front of the inn and watched with no expression. This was the world of the powerful and wealthy. They didn't care about the life and death of the lower class. Their fine clothes and fine food were taken from the lower class. Their joys, anger, sorrows, and joys always caused the death of the lower class. My father died tragically because of this. Carl was considered a kind person. At least he gave the mother who lost her young child a bag of silver that was enough for her to live on. But I hated it. That child's mother also hated it. Could silver buy the life of the child she had carried in her womb for 10 months and accompanied for 3 years? Princes and nobles are they really of a different breed? Oh, Carl galloped on his horse, but stopped abruptly outside the house. From the high pavilion on the 2nd floor of the house came the sound of a gherkin. The sound of the gherkin was like silk and bamboo lingering around the beam, pleasing to the ear. Carl unconsciously dismounted and stopped to listen carefully. I walked past him sideways, but my body went limp, and I almost fell into his arms. Damn it, Pio. Carl opened his mouth to curse, but the moment he saw me, he stopped abruptly. He was stunned for a while, and then a gentle smile appeared on his face. Miss, are you all right? All the men in the world were like this. When they saw beauty, they couldn't take their eyes off it. At this time, I was covering my face with a white veil, and did not show my true face, but a pair of pitch black eyes were staring at Carl with a seemingly affectionate and seemingly timid gaze. I shook my head slightly, my voice as sweet as honey. I'm fine. Before he could ask again, I had already turned and left. When I left, there was a fragrance on my body. Gentle. The fragrance was very light, but like the sound of the gherkin, it lingered in the air. Carl was mesmerized. He called for his guards. Come follow that lady with the veil, just now. The guards bowed their heads and said, yes. He followed me all the way to Emily's mansion. Inside the tea house, the sound of the gherkin was like a mountain stream flowing endlessly. Carl stepped upstairs. He saw a woman in a light blue or gold embroidered dress playing the gherkin with her head bowed. The woman was extremely beautiful, elegant, and her skin was like suet, jade so white and tender that it seemed as if it could be broken by a blow. Was she still the arrogant and dominating Emily? Carl was a little lost. When the song ended, he clapped his hands repeatedly. Miss Emily, when I first saw you, I only thought you were an angel. But after hearing you play a song, my heart is already drunk." Emily smiled, her white and tender jade-like fingers gently plucking the strings of the cocoon again. The sound of the gukin started again. The sound of the gukin remained the same. Although Emily did not speak, the love and affection carried by the sound of the gukin had already entered Carl's heart. Carl obviously hadn't drunk any wine. However, he was already drunk. He was drunk in the sound of the gukin, drunk in the fragrance of the beauty. 3 days later, Carl proposed to the apple of the king's eye, Emily. Emily readily agreed. The country gave 10 cities, thousands of miles of brocade, thousands of gold, silver, and jade to Emily as a dowry. Emily was about to marry into a foreign land. The wedding ceremony was complete. Carl was outside, toasting and drinking. Emily was bathing in the hot spring. Her black hair, like a waterfall, was stained with bath flowers, and her skin as white as suet. Jade was immersed in the water, making her look like a fairy. It was just a pity that her face without any makeup was extremely ugly. I gently rubbed her shoulders and suddenly said, "Miss, have you heard about the death of Beauty One?" Beauty was of humble birth, the daughter of a groom. She was favored by the king while taming a horse, and was given the title of Beauty. Later the king discovered that Beauty One was not a virgin and was furious, so he gave her white silk to hang herself with. Emily was a little unhappy. "Why do you bring up such an unlucky person?" I summoned up my courage and said, "Miss Beauty One died because she was not a virgin. I'm worried that you tonight will also be in trouble because you are not a virgin." Insolent. Emily slapped me in the face. "I am a virgin. How dare you spread rumors? I'll pull out your tongue." She used a lot of force, and I fell to the ground. My mouth was filled with the taste of rust, and blood overflowed from a corner of my mouth. But it was as if I couldn't feel the pain. I hurriedly knelt down and said, repeatedly, "Miss Beauty One and I were close friends before she entered the palace. Therefore I know very well that she was definitely a virgin. It's just that she was the daughter of a groom, so she couldn't avoid riding horses every day. So the blood of her virginity was taken away by the bumps on the horse." I kept quoting in my voice, becoming more and more nervous. "Miss, you love riding horses and hunting, so I'm worried. I'm worried that your virginity is gone." Slap. Before I could finish my words, Emily slapped me in the face again. "You lowly slave, stop cursing me." I braced myself and pleaded, "Miss, it's better to be safe than sorry. Nurse, when you have your first night with Prince Carl, if the same thing happens to you as it did to Beauty One, then what will Prince Carl think of you?" Emily's face gradually turned pale. She gritted her teeth and said, word by word, "I have always heard that men from foreign lands are straightforward, and don't care whether women are virgins or not. Not to mention, I am a virgin." Although she said so, I knew that she was worried in her heart. "Miss, even if you are a virgin, there is no sign of virginity on your wedding night. Then Prince Carl will definitely think that you are not a virgin." I patiently persuaded men from foreign lands are indeed straightforward, but it is definitely better to have than not to have. Emily closed her eyes tightly and took a shallow breath. After a long time she lowered her voice and asked, "Then what do you say I should do?" I lowered my head even lower, but the smile on my lips could not help but show. I have a recipe using pigeon blood. "Miss, when you're having fun with the prince, in the name of shyness, order the servants to turn off the lights and candles. After the event, you sprinkle the pigeon blood, which can deceive him. In the end, Emily believed me and asked me to kill the pigeon and take its blood. I went to the kitchen, took the pigeon, and carefully went to a deserted place, ready to cut the pigeon's neck. At this time, a drunken Carl walked over. I was startled and hurriedly kicked the dead pigeon into my sleeve. Your Highness. Now I wasn't wearing a veil, and my face was covered with ugly and hideous scars. Carl glanced at me and said, "You are Emily's personal maid. Instead of serving your mistress, you are sneaking around here. What are you doing? Take out what's in your hand." I became even more nervous. Nothing. A smile appeared on the corner of Carl's mouth. The guard behind him immediately drew his sword. "If you don't take out what's in your hand, don't blame me for killing you." I was so scared that I hurriedly offered the dead pigeon in my arms. A hint of doubt appeared in Carl's eyes. "A dead pigeon? Why are you so nervous?" I stammered. I like to drink the blood of dead pigeons." Of course, Carl didn't believe it. Just then, a servant came to report that the king had called him to drink. He looked at me deeply, turned around, and left. I poured the pigeon blood into the fish maw, sewed it up with a needle and thread, and then presented it to Emily. "Oh!" Emily was very happy. "Little slave, you did a good job. With this, I can indeed have more assurance." She was satisfied, and I couldn't help but say, "Miss, I have another way to make the prince even more infatuated with you." Emily asked, "What is it?" I took out the erotic picture that I had prepared from my sleeve. "Miss, in our country, when ordinary women get married, their parents will prepare this picture. You can take a look." "Insolent. I am extremely noble. How can I look at such filthy things?" Emily kicked me in the chest again, and the erotic picture rolled to the ground. She snorted coldly. "Get out of here, you lazy slave." Yes, I rolled and crawled out of the tent. The moonlight outside was bright and cold. I took a deep breath of the cold air of the desert and felt unprecedentedly refreshed. Emily, she didn't know. Carl's mother was extremely lewd and liked to have fun with many men. Carl had seen his mother's debauchery since he was a child. As a result, he was extremely concerned about the fidelity of women. He went to our country to marry because everyone in the world knew that women in our country regarded chastity as their life. Carl must have thought that the noble lady he had married was the most chaste person. That on the wedding night, Emily, under my inducement, would definitely arouse Carl's suspicion with her seductive posture. Emily thought that the pigeon blood she had taken could fool him. But she didn't know that Carl had been shooting birds since he was a child. Carl knew exactly what the blood of a bird smelled like, and what the color of the dried blood of a dead bird was. Emily was finished. At this time, Carl staggered his steps and slowly opened the curtain. Inside the warm tent, Emily was posing, her face flushed with shyness. Outside the curtain, I squatted on one side, the smile on my lips becoming more and more uncontrollable. I was really looking forward to the scene where Emily was full of joy, but Carl was furious, reaching out to pinch her neck and scolding her for being a slut and a bitch. It was a clear night with a bright moon. Inside the warm tent, to my surprise, there was no anger. The night passed peacefully. Carl walked out of the tent refreshed. As he left, he glanced at me. I was so scared that I hurriedly lowered my head. He smiled at me. "Why is it that my lady's appearance is like a fairy descending to earth?" But you are so ugly and hideous. I lowered my head. I was born ugly. I am fortunate to be able to serve my lady because she doesn't dislike me. Carl suddenly reached out and pinched my chin, forcing me to raise my head. He said, although you were born ugly, your eyes are very bright as the moon. Not long after Carl left, Emily called me into the tent. Little slave, come here. I hurriedly walked into the tent. Emily was covered by a second quilt, her body as slender as a willow-looking leek and fragile, but her tone was extremely vicious. Little slave, your eyes are really beautiful. Even if your face is disfigured, you can still use your eyes to seduce men. I immediately knelt down and counted. Miss, I have never thought of seducing the prince. Of course, I know. Emily slowly stood up. She approached me, her fingertips painted with black cardamom scraping my eyelids inch by inch. I really want to dig out your eyes that are as bright as the moon. I trembled like a sieve. Miss, if you dig out my eyes, I won't be able to draw eyebrows and paint for you anymore. Emily's sharp fingertips suddenly poked into the scar on my face that had been bitten by the venomous insect, and she smiled. Of course I'm not willing to dig you out. Without you, then, who will paint the scar on my face? I convulsed in pain, but I still kowtowed and thanked Emily. Emily asked me to do her makeup again. This was the 5th day she had used the zombie bone. Logically, the poison should have taken effect. Her face should have been rotting, or she should have been weak. But strangely, she looked no different from usual. I took a deep breath. 2 more days, I'll just wait patiently. Behind the hibiscus curtain, Carl and Emily were inseparable and enjoyed each other's company every day. I waited patiently. The foreign land was located on the border and was bitterly cold. Usually, even the top wealthy families rarely bathed in spring water. But Carl loved Emily and was willing to serve her with hot springs. The desert was extremely hot during the day, making one's body sweaty and muddy. I couldn't stand it. This night, while Emily was having fun with Carl, I sneaked out to the lake in the no man's land in the suburbs to wash up. The moon was bright and clear. I took off my clothes and swam freely in the cold lake water. In the sparkling lake water, Mr. Jack's face suddenly appeared in my mind. Mr. Jack was the most handsome man I had ever met. His skin was fairer than a woman's, and he was handsome, but not feminine. It was just a pity that Mr. Jack was not in good health and his legs seemed to be paralyzed. When I first met him, he was paralyzed in a wheelchair. When I left him, he was still in the wheelchair. Mr. Jack was very kind to me. He taught me all kinds of culture etiquette that girls should know and never said a harsh word to me. Only when I said goodbye to him, he gave me the zombie bone. He said that this bone is very poisonous and can only be used on enemies. He also said that if I can't get revenge, then I should use this bone to draw my eyebrows. I still didn't understand why Mr. Jack said such harsh words to me that day. As I was lost in thought, a pair of big hands wrapped around me from behind. Chia? I was startled and wanted to struggle out, but unexpectedly the arm was extremely strong, restraining me, making me unable to move at all. Don't move. The voice of the person behind me was extremely hoarse, but my whole body stiffened. I recognized it. It was him. It was Carl. I knew you were the lady with the veil that day. Carl's palm slowly lifted and stroked my cheek. Do you know that I married Emily just to get you? Who are? I said tremblingly, Your Highness, you've got the wrong person. I am ugly, and not the one you like. A person's appearance can change, but her eyes can't. Carl suddenly turned my body over. His dark eyes met mine. I like your eyes. The scar on your face was bitten by a venomous insect, but I know that this venomous insect was specially bred. As long as we find a good doctor, it can definitely be repaired. I frowned, Your Highness. Don't you like Miss Emily the most? A hint of disgust appeared on the corner of Carl's mouth. I like her. She's just a ruling flower. I married her just to confuse the king and make him let down his guard against us. As soon as he said these words, my body couldn't help but stiffen. He knew that I was Emily's maid, but he told me such a national secret. This meant that either he was determined to get me, or he would tell me to silence me. Emily is arrogant and domineering by nature. I can't possibly like her. Carl slowly approached me again, his voice extremely hoarse. And like you, it was love at first sight for me. Except for Mr. Jack, I felt extremely disgusted by all men. It was so disgusting that I got goosebumps all over my body. Your Highness, please spare my life. If Emily knew that you liked me, she would kill me. After saying it, I pushed him away hard and swam towards the shore in a panic. When I returned to Emily's tent, she scolded angrily. You wrong slave, where have you been? Why didn't you answer when I called you just now? I trembled. I overslept. Willie, you overslept. Emily sneered and took out a silver needle from her sleeve. I hate it most when people lie to me. Now, tell me immediately, where did you go? The silver needle pierced my tongue, causing my tongue to bleed non-stop. I knelt down on both knees, tears streaming down my face, and said truthfully, Miss, I'm sorry, the prince forced me. He forced me. Insolent. Emily abruptly pulled out the needle and stabbed it hard on my face. How could the prince possibly fall for an ugly slave like you? Furious to the extreme, she shouted angrily, someone dismember her for me. The guards outside the tent quickly rushed in, grabbed me, and were about to drag me out. I screamed and begged her to spare my life. Emily turned a deaf ear. Just as the guard's sword was about to cut off my arm, Emily rushed out again. She looked at me with a cold face. Stay away from the prince in the future. I echoed repeatedly and said yes. But in my heart there was no joy of surviving a disaster. I knew that I would not die. Emily would never kill me. She couldn't live without me. Without me, the scar on her face couldn't be covered up. Another day passed. It had been the 7th day since Emily used the zombie bone. Emily sat in front of the dressing mirror, still radiant, her appearance still the same, looking no different. I stared at the zombie bone in my hand in disbelief. I remembered clearly that Mr. Jack had said that after using it, one would definitely die within 7 days. But why? There was nothing wrong with Emily. Not only was there nothing wrong with her, but the poisonous scars on her face seemed to have become lighter. My heart began to pound. Could it be that Mr. Jack had lied to me? Another 10 days passed. Emily was still perfectly fine. The scar on her face had faded to the point where it was almost invisible. Little slave, your brush is really effective. It can not only cover up my scar, but also lighten it. Emily looked at me with a smile, her voice extremely gentle. Little slave, you have really helped me a lot. Tell me, how should I thank you? I replied truthfully, Miss. I only ask that you allow me to stay by your side and serve you. Emily smiled again. Oh, you want to stay by my side so you can seduce the prince. I was speechless and just stared at her blankly. At this moment, I was extremely nervous. I had never been so nervous before. I had always been confident that Emily would die after using my zombie bone. But now things had gone beyond my expectations. She was not dead. Mr. Jack, it seemed, had really lied to me. I suddenly felt a sense of despair. This feeling was like when I was 7 years old, my parents both died. Tragically, I was sold to a brothel by my most trusted uncle. And now I was once again deceived by the most trusted Mr. Jack, losing my life. I kind of wanted to cry. I had shed a lot of tears. But only the tears at this moment were the most painful and saddest. I didn't call Emily anymore. I just told her, Miss, are you going to kill me now? But you still have some scars on your face. These scars can still be seen if you look closely. Since ancient times, beauty has been flawless. Are you willing to have scars on your beautiful jade? Emily patted my face gently. Why are you thinking about death? You are my right-hand man. How could I be willing to kill you? She rewarded me with a lot of gold, silver, and jewelry. But I knew that this was just to appease me. The day the scar on her face disappeared would be the day I died. But I was no longer the child who would only cry and be bullied. That night, I took a zombie bone and carefully painted my scarred face. Then my original face was revealed. I felt very uncomfortable. Mr. Jack once said that my face was the most beautiful face in the world. But I didn't believe it. If my face was beautiful, Mr. Jack should have liked me. So how could he bear to deceive me and almost let me die at Emily's hands? So how could he bear to deceive me and almost let me die at Emily's hands? So how could he bear to deceive me and almost let me die at Emily's hands? So how could he bear to deceive me and almost let me die at Emily's hands? So how could he bear to deceive me and almost let me die at Emily's hands? So how could he bear to deceive me and almost let me die at Emily's hands? I had always thought that after the zombie bone killed Emily silently, I would leave. But now I couldn't leave. Once Emily's scar was gone, I would surely die. My only background now was Carl. I sighed, picked up the red robe on the side and wrapped it around myself and walked towards the lake in the distant suburbs. The night was deep. The night was quiet. But the night was not cold. Carl also came to the lake. He looked at me with an almost infatuated and adoring look. After this night, Carl made me his concubine. I leaped from a humble maid to the prince's concubine. Emily was furious. She stormed over, raised her hand, and was about to slap me. You lowly slave, you actually dared to seduce the prince? I should have killed you sooner. This time, I didn't endure it. I reached out and grabbed her delicate wrist, staring at her coldly. You and I are both women serving the prince. What right do you have to slap me? Emily saw that she couldn't hurt me, so she turned to the maids and ordered them to slap me. The maids didn't hesitate to strike me. My face was slapped red and purple. What's going on here? Carl walked in with a cold face. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Your Highness, you once said that you would love me forever, but why? Why did you take in someone else? Carl didn't even look at me. He put his arms around Emily's slender waist and kept apologizing. Emily, she's just a side dish I eat occasionally. I promise, I will always love you. Hey. This was a man. He whispered sweet nothings to me last night, but today he turned his back on me. But I didn't feel anything. My heart was completely dead. I only had one thought: to kill Emily. Afterward, Carl kept apologizing to me. He said that his father was about to send troops to attack our country, and at this juncture, he couldn't anger Emily. He also promised me that once our country fell, he would be crowned Crown Prince, and then he would make me his Crown Princess. I pretended to be surprised. Your Highness, I hope you'll keep your word. 3 months later, Emily became pregnant. The fetus in her womb made her even more noble. Carl doted on her. One day when Emily got up in the morning, she specifically asked me to serve her. I had no choice but to obey. As I used the zombie bone to paint her eyebrows again, I felt like I had become the humble maid she used to humiliate. My thoughts gradually drifted away, and I couldn't help but think of Mr. Jack again. I met Mr. Jack on the street outside the brothel. At that time, the madam forced me to receive customers. I escaped, but the madam sent people to chase after me. Those people hit my back with wooden sticks again and again. When I was dying, Mr. Jack appeared. He paid money to ransom me. I begged him to take me home. Later, Mr. Jack and I lived in the mountains for 11 years. Mr. Jack was a gentle and refined man. He would not fight and kill. He also did not like viciousness and ruthlessness. However, the hatred in my heart had never diminished. He knew that I had a deep hatred in my heart, so after I became an adult, he let me leave. When I left, he gave me a zombie bone. Slap. Emily suddenly stabbed my hand with a hairpin. He painted my eyebrows too heavily. Are you trying to die? I withdrew my hand that was covered in blood from being stabbed and hurriedly knelt down. I didn't do it on purpose. Please forgive me, Mace. Emily thought she had subdued me and was very smug. You lowly slave, I will kill you sooner or later. She only cared about killing me. Little did she know, our country was in imminent danger. In the early years, our country was already struggling due to natural disasters and droughts. Later, the king became old and spent his days drinking, having fun and seeking pleasure in his drunken state. He began to neglect state affairs. Our country was now controlled by corrupt officials and eunuchs. The eunuchs only wanted to plunder every bit of gold and silver from the country. They even wanted to plunder the rice seeds for spring. Without the spring rice seeds, the people would suffer. Without food, they would rebel. The corrupt officials and eunuchs concealed this. The king was even more unaware. Another 4 months passed. It was the time of the scorching August heat. Our country was littered with bones. Rebels plundered everywhere. Meanwhile, Emily with her big belly was bathing her suet-jawed skin in the hot spring of a foreign land. Carl kissed her belly and told her the day has come for us to pay tribute to our country once a year. Emily clung to his arm. I will go back with you to see my father. Carl refused without hesitation. The journey is long and you are so pregnant. What if something happens? After refusing, Emily, Carl entered my tent. In the warm tent, he told me word by word, this time I go. It will be at least 3 months, at most 10 months before I return. In the past, it only took a month at most for the foreign land to pay tribute. But this time, such a long time. It was obviously not a tribute, but an attack on our country. I stared at him blankly. Why are you telling me such a confidential matter? Carl gently stroked my cheek and smiled. Because I like you. I really like you. His love words were sweet. I pretended to be extremely touched. I like you too. I like you so much that I can't live without you. Carl was gone for 3 months. During these 3 months, I was terrified and tried my best not to meet Emily. When Carl returned, it was October. It was a crisp and refreshing autumn day. Emily couldn't contain her joy. She took off her clothes and specifically asked me to serve her in the bath. Normally, I would have refused, but not today. Inside the warm tent, Emily lay comfortably. In the hot spring, her face smiled. You used to pretend to be sick and didn't dare to see me. Why do you dare see me today? I looked at her with a smile. 'Cause Carl will be back soon. Shut up, how dare you address the prince by his name directly? Emily raised her hand as if to slap me again. But I wouldn't tolerate her anymore. I grabbed her hair and pushed her hard into the water. My voice was like a demon from hell, icy cold. You thought Carl was coming back to congratulate you. I tell you, he's coming back with your father's head. Emily, her belly round and huge, struggled with all her might and finally poked her head out of the water. What did you say? I smiled and said, word by word, for 3 months Carl has been away. He has been destroying our country. Now our country has been destroyed. You are no longer a princess. Emily believed it. Her emotions fluctuated so much that her stomach began to cramp. When Carl returned, it happened to be the time when Emily was about to give birth. Inside the warm tent, Emily's belly, usually fair, had become extremely bruised and hideous. Through the high protruding belly, it seemed as if the child inside would burst out of her skin at any moment. Emily's face was contorted in pain. She grabbed Carl's arm and asked painfully, did you go and kill my father? Carl shook his head and smiled. Absolutely not. Emily's heart relaxed immediately, and she suddenly shouted, kill. Kill her, kill me. Ha ha ha. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to laugh out loud. Emily, the one who was about to die was you. Emily was really about to give birth. Her cries of pain became louder and more intense. Carl walked out of the tent and gently put his arms around my shoulders. Lucy, I love you very much. From now on, I will only dote on you. I felt disgusted. There was only one person in the world who could call me by my name like that. That person was Mr. Jack. No, it's not. I hated Mr. Jack. If he hadn't lied to me with the zombie bone, how could I have humbled myself before Carl? In the world, the only one who could call me Lucy was my dead parents. What I had to do now was to open my eyes wide and watch carefully how the person who killed my parents was going to die a horrible death. With a loud bang, the midwife suddenly screamed in terror. The ghost woman is here. The ghost woman has given birth to insects. What's going on? Carl hurried into the tent, only to see that Emily had given birth to a mass of thin, long, reddish black insects. What Emily gave birth to was not a child, but a mass of thin, long, reddish black insects. The insects were wriggling on the ground in the blood, looking extremely terrifying. Although the fallen land had a straightforward folk custom, they had never seen such a strange and terrifying thing as a human giving birth to insects. Kara was stunned for a moment, standing there frozen, not moving. Emily was lying on the bed, drenched in cold sweat, shouting in terror, "Help! Help me!" I pretended to kneel on the ground and shouted, "Miss, I know you want to secure your position, but how can you deceive the prince by filling your belly with goo insects? You bitch." Emily raised her hand with difficulty, cursing me in pain and ferocity. "I want you to die. You bitch." The red insects on the ground had slowly started to crawl towards the outside of the tent. Carl's face was full of disgust, and he waved his hand. "Someone put the insect woman to death." I hurriedly stopped him. "Your Highness, although Emily gave birth to insects, she did it out of love for you. Moreover, she is still the princess of our country. If you rashly put her to death, how will you explain it to our country?" Carl sneered. "Our country has been destroyed. She is nothing but an anonymous insect woman. Our country has fallen." Emily, who was on the verge of death, suddenly let out a mournful wail. "Father, my father. Emily should have been put to death. But I still tried my best to save her life. In the end, she fell from the most noble princess to the most humble maid. She became my maid." Emily was full of resentment towards me. "Don't think that I will be grateful to you just because you saved me. You think I saved you?" I whispered in her ear, "Did you know that the red insects in your belly were all my doing? I have learned medicine, food, and pharmacology from Mr. Jack. In the desert, I found red insect eggs at the bottom of the sand. These insects were tiny and rarely saw the light of day. I mixed the insect eggs into Emily's food, and then used medicine to suppress them, preventing them from hatching in her belly, until Emily was 10 months pregnant. I removed the medicine, the insect eggs woke up and wriggled in her belly. It was you. It really was you who harmed me." Emily looked at me in disbelief. "I'm going to tell the prince about your vicious intentions." I slapped her across the face. "You insect woman. You are so lowly. The prince spared your life, and not only are you not grateful, you even want to curse him. Someone take her to the depths of the desert." The desert was bitterly cold, extremely hot during the day, and as cold as ice at night. After a few days in the depths of the desert, Emily lost her former beauty, became weak, and looked old. She was about to die. That day, on the pretext of practicing archery, I made Emily stand in front of the target with an apple on her head. I said, "Emily, you've always been the one shooting others. Today is the first time you've been shot right." Emily glared at me. "You woolly slave, if you want to kill me, just kill me." I stared straight at her. "You still want me to spare you, eh?" She shot back, "Do you think you will spare me?" I threw the bow to the maid and smiled faintly. "Of course you can run now. Run as fast and as far as you can." Emily's dark eyes met mine. After a while, she suddenly started running wildly towards the vast desert, as if she had lost her mind. I picked up my bow and arrow and shot an arrow through her neck. The most painful thing in the world was probably giving someone hope and then crushing it. Emily had shot and killed my mother in this way. Now I had returned the favor, in kind. Emily fell to the ground, Her eyes were wide open. I walked up to her and pulled out the arrow that had pierced her neck. "Noble Miss Emily, do you still remember 10 years ago when you killed a lumberjack and a fleeing woman in the forest?" Emily opened her mouth with difficulty, but blood gushed out of her mouth like a spring. I smiled and whipped her body again and again. "You fool, you killed my parents, and you actually thought I would spare you. I tell you, I can't wait to skin you alive and tear your tendons out." Emily was dead. My revenge was finally complete. Our country was destroyed and changed hands. The name of the country changed to Great Earth. The foreign land moved its capital to our capital city. Carl made me his queen. During the coronation ceremony, I saw Mr. Chag. He was still in the wheelchair, looking at me with a faint smile. I was indifferent. I had always wanted to find him. I wanted to ask him why the zombie bone didn't kill Emily in 7 days. Did he know that because the zombie bone was ineffective, I was almost killed by Emily? But now, the moment I saw him, I knew the answer. Mr. Jack was a gentleman. He taught me piano, chess, calligraphy, painting, and all the skills that a noble woman should know. However, this was far from enough. When I parted with him, he taught me one last lesson. Don't trust anyone. I once had some true feelings for Mr. Jack. Now, it's all gone with the wind. In my ears, I heard the high-pitched voice of the priest. "One bow to heaven and earth, 2 bows to the ancestors." In this life, I would join hands with Kyle and face everything together.
I liked Lucy, but I wasn't worthy of her. My legs were crippled. Lucy would never know that the death of her parents was actually half my fault. I was Emily's advisor. That day, if I hadn't suggested that Emily go hunting in the forest, maybe Lucy's parents would never have died. Lucy's parents were from the same village as me. They were very kind to me and once gave me a bowl of hot porridge when I was poor and destitute. But I indirectly killed them. After Emily killed Lucy's parents, she even whipped their corpses. I knelt down and begged Emily to spare their bodies. Emily smiled and said that as long as I broke my own legs, I could keep their bodies. So I broke my own legs. From then on, Emily abandoned me. Later, I wanted to find Lucy. After searching everywhere, I found her in a brothel. She was covered in scars and looked terrible, but I wasn't afraid. Lucy used to have a happy family, but because of me, she had been reduced to such a state. I took her in and taught her all kinds of medicine, food, and pharmacology in the valley. More than 10 years in the valley. Lucy never forgot her hatred for Emily for killing her father. Little did she know that Emily was the most powerful person in the world now, and wanting to kill Emily was like trying to reach the sky in one step. Therefore, when Lucy left, I gave her the zombie bone. This zombie bone couldn't actually kill people, but it could save people and remove scars. I gave her this because it was the last thing I could teach her. I wanted to tell her that no one in this world was worthy of trust. Later, I heard that she had become Cos concubine, and later, she became his queen. Lucy finally got her revenge. I knew that she would not come looking for me again. Perhaps this was for the best. I had atoned for the harm I had caused, and Lucy had gotten what she wanted. It was just that in the dead of night, I would always think of those bright moon-like eyes, and that heart that was burning with hatred. I prayed that Lucy would find true happiness instead of being immersed in hatred. because I knew that hatred would eventually devour a person's soul.
I sat in a high position, watching the priest shoots, and heard Carl's voice in my ears. Lucy, are you alright? I smiled and nodded. I'm fine. But only I knew that my heart had never truly been at peace. Emily's death had given me the pleasure of revenge, but at the same time, I had also lost my purpose in life. Everything I had done before was for revenge, and now that my revenge had been carried out, I felt extremely empty. Carl was very good to me. He doted on me, gave me everything I had ever dreamed of. But I knew that none of this could fill the void in my heart. In the dead of night, I would always think of my parents and Mr. Jack. They were the most important people in my life, and now they were all gone. The happy life I once had would never come back. Perhaps this was the price of revenge. I got everything, but lost the most important thing. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I told myself that I had to go on living. For my parents, for Mr. Jack, and for myself, I would find a new purpose in life in this strange land. I would not let hatred continue to rule my life. I would find true happiness. Even if this road was full of thorns and bumps, I would walk on firmly, because I had nothing left to lose. Only in this way could I truly live up to those who died for me.